It started with a whisper and ended with blood on my Sunday dress. I was just 9, barefoot, sunburnt, with ribbons in my hair. My daddy told me God trusted him to raise me right, to teach me what a man's love felt like. He said it was holy. He said it was ours, a secret, and I believed him. Until one day, I felt something tear, and I knew God wasn't anywhere near that room. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I went to church the next morning with a smile and a stain between my legs. And no one asked. No one ever asked. Not Mama, not the pastor, not even the nurse at school. That was Jackson, Mississippi, in 1958. That was my home. And this is my truth. My name is Bertha Eloise Carter. I'm 76 years old, born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. Back then, girls like me didn't talk back, didn't ask questions, and sure didn't speak on things that ought to stay inside the home. I was the second of 4 daughters, the quiet one, the helper. Daddy used to call me his angel child. Folks at church called our family blessed. Daddy was a deacon. Mama sang alto in the choir. And every Sunday we were lined up in our best, bows, gloves, patent leather shoes, like some perfect postcard. But postcards don't show what happens after church. Behind closed doors. In locked bedrooms. They don't show a little girl crying into her pillow while her daddy reads scripture like it's a bedtime story. They don't show how hard it is to keep a secret that burns through your bones. I kept that secret for over 60 years. I wore it like a second skin. I buried it under casseroles, church hats, and forced smiles. But I'm not burying it anymore. Because someone out there needs to hear this. And know they're not the only one who bled. If you're from a town like Jackson, where secrets stay behind curtains and pain hides behind prayer, I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments. Let me know where you're from, and if Bertha's story touches something deep in you. Don't let it sit in silence. Comment your city. Let your voice be counted. Like this video if this story moved you. Subscribe for more truths that deserve to be heard, from women who've been quiet for too long. I used to think Sundays were the safest days of the week. Mama would wake us up with biscuits in the oven and her favorite hymn humming through the kitchen. Daddy would be sitting at the table, already dressed in his brown deacon suit, Bible in one hand, coffee in the other. My sisters and I would take turns ironing dresses, braiding each other's hair, rushing to find missing gloves or that one pearl earring someone always lost. We looked like a church family from a picture book. Folks at Greater Mount Zion called us the Carter Girls. Everyone smiled when we walked in, like they were proud we belonged to their community. Daddy had a booming voice, the kind people trusted. He prayed over the offering, passed communion, taught Sunday school. Mama sat in the second pew, hands folded just right, always singing harmony. And me? I sat still, smiling, obedient, a good girl. But even then, even when I was just 9, I knew something was wrong with Sundays. It started small. At first, it was just the way Daddy looked at me when he handed me my gloves. The way his hand lingered when he buttoned the top of my dress. The way his voice changed when he said, "You're growing up fast, Bertha, real fast." Then came the first lesson. It was after church, one warm spring afternoon. Mama had taken my sisters to choir practice, and Daddy said he needed to talk to me about modesty. He brought me to the back room, the one where he kept his church books, his records, and his jar of peppermint candy. I remember the smell, sweet and sharp, mixed with pipe smoke and something that made my stomach turn. He locked the door. I didn't ask why. Because in our house, you didn't question Daddy. He sat me down on the little couch and opened his Bible, read from Proverbs, talked about purity, about obedience, about how daughters needed to honor their fathers as they would honor the Lord. Then he touched my knee, soft at first, then firmer. "You understand this is just between us, right?" he said. "God don't like loose talk, and your mama wouldn't understand." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. I was 9. I didn't have words for it, but my body understood. My body stiffened, my throat burned, and when I got home that night and Mama asked why I was quiet, all I could say was, "I'm just tired." She smiled and said, "That's all right, baby. Church days wear us out." No one saw the blood on my slip later that week. I washed it out myself in the bathroom sink, scrubbed until my knuckles turned red, then stuffed it in the laundry pile and prayed no one would notice. But Sundays kept coming, and Daddy kept finding reasons to teach me. He'd say, "You're special, Bertha. God chose you for a reason." He'd whisper prayers while holding me in ways no father should. He called it spiritual guidance. I called it silence, because what else could I do? I wasn't like other girls. I didn't talk back. I didn't run wild. I did my chores, read my Bible, smiled at the neighbors. I was Daddy's angel child. And angels don't scream. The worst part? I still wanted him to love me. I still waited for his approval. I still felt proud when he said, "You make me proud, baby girl." That kind of love, twisted, conditional, dangerous, stays with you long after the bruises fade. It was around that time I started faking stomach aches to avoid church. Mama would fuss, but she never questioned it too hard. Sometimes I think she knew, not everything, but enough. She'd give me ginger ale, lay me on the couch, stroke my hair, and then, as soon as the front door closed behind them, Daddy would come back. He said, "This way you get extra time with your daddy. You should feel special." I started sleeping with my hands clenched into fists. Sundays became my prison. While other kids colored Bible verses and giggled over cookies in the fellowship hall, I was locking myself in the bathroom at home, praying, really praying, for something to stop it. But nothing ever did. The house stayed quiet. The locks stayed locked, and Daddy's voice kept calling me his blessing. When I bled the second time, I folded the stained underwear into a paper bag and buried it under the azalea bush in the backyard. Because even at 9 years old, I knew no one would believe me unless I had proof. And even with proof, who would I tell? Not the school nurse. She was friends with Mama, not the pastor. He and Daddy played dominoes on Fridays, not Mama. She smiled too much to hear it. So I told no one, and the secret settled in me like a second spine, crooked, heavy, unbreakable. There's a sound a doorknob makes when it turns slowly, soft, steady, like a breath held too long. I came to know that sound better than I knew the sound of Mama's voice or the creak of the porch swing outside. It meant Daddy was coming, and it almost always happened after dark. Most nights, the house would fall into its rhythm. My sisters asleep, their soft snoring in the next room. Mama in bed by 9:30, a dish towel still tucked over her shoulder, the day finally laid to rest. And then, the turn of the knob, the press of a footstep, the weight of a secret crawling through my bedroom door. He never rushed. He'd sit on the edge of my bed and say something soft. A verse, a prayer, sometimes just my name, Bertha. Sometimes he'd bring his Bible, other times just the peppermint candy. "This is how daughters learn to love right," he'd whisper. "You're getting your lessons early. That means God has big plans for you." I didn't respond, not because I agreed, but because I had stopped trying to resist. I learned early that fighting only made it worse, that crying only made him angry, that silence was safer. I trained myself to breathe without sound, to stare at the ceiling and count every swirl in the plaster, to disappear inside my own body. At school, I still made good grades, still raised my hand, still smiled when Mr. Thompson said, "Now there's a young lady who's going places." He didn't know I was already traveling, away from myself, further each night. There was a moment, I was maybe 10 and a half, when I decided I would tell. I didn't know who, but I couldn't take it anymore. I wrote a note. It said, "He comes into my room. He tells me it's holy, but it hurts. I folded it up, put it in my coat pocket, and carried it to school. At recess, I stood outside the teacher's lounge for what felt like an hour, that note burning in my pocket like fire. I imagined what would happen if I handed it over. The look of shock, the calls, the questions, the sirens. But I also imagined Daddy's face if he found out. And that fear won. I tore the note into little pieces and flushed it down the girls' bathroom toilet. That night, when he came into my room, I didn't move, I didn't speak, I just let my soul go numb again. There were times he cried afterward. That was maybe the most confusing part. He'd weep quietly, his hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You forgive me, don't you? God knows I don't mean to sin, but the devil, he's strong." I wanted to scream, "The devil is in you," but I couldn't. Because in Jackson, Mississippi in 1959, daddies didn't get accused, they got respect. And little black girls didn't get believed, they got labeled. Fast, confused, rebellious. And I wasn't rebellious. I was obedient, too obedient. I stopped asking for new dresses even when mine didn't fit anymore. I stopped wearing my favorite color, yellow, because it reminded me of the day it all began. I started hiding in small places, the shed, the pantry, behind the church, places where I could press my body into corners and feel the world quiet down. I even started praying again, not for it to stop, but for it to make sense. "Lord, I," whispered one night, "if this is how you show love, I don't think I want it anymore." I remember feeling guilty even thinking that. But what kind of God watches a little girl bleed and says nothing? That's when the dark stopped scaring me. Not because it wasn't scary, but because I'd learned. The real danger didn't come when the lights went out. It came when the lessons began. There's a lie people tell about Southern mamas, that they always know, always protect, always put their children first. I used to believe it, but now I know better. Because my mama? She knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. She knew I flinched when Daddy walked in the room. She knew I started washing my own underwear at 9 years old. She knew I'd go silent when she talked about how lucky we were to have a man like Clarence. And still, she said nothing. I remember one night in particular. I was 11. Daddy had just left my room. I was curled up tight, facing the wall, breathing shallow so. I wouldn't cry out loud. Mama opened the door, quietly like she wasn't supposed to, and stood there for a few seconds. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I felt her eyes on me, the weight of them, heavy with something that wasn't quite guilt, but wasn't ignorance either. She whispered, "You okay, baby?" I wanted to scream no, but all I could manage was a nod, a lie. She stepped inside, pulled the blanket up to my shoulders, and kissed the side of my head. "You be strong," she said, softly. "Sometimes strength is staying quiet." Then she left, and I hated her for it, not in the kind of way that sticks forever, but in the kind of way that festers, that grows like mold behind a wall, quiet, hidden, dangerous. The next morning she made my favorite breakfast, cheese grits with scrambled eggs, like nothing had happened. That's what hurt the most. Not that she didn't stop it, but that she kept pretending she didn't see it. Later that week, I noticed she started staying up. Later than usual, folding clothes in the living room long after Daddy went to bed. And on 2 occasions, I saw her lock the girls' bedroom door from the outside after we'd gone in. Not mine, just my sister's. She was protecting them and leaving me to fend for myself. I started watching her differently, listening to the way she avoided certain words, how she changed the subject when Daddy bragged about how close me and Bertha are, how she flinched just slightly when he placed his hand on my back at church. Mama was a master at avoidance. She cleaned like she was scrubbing guilt off the floor, cooked like she could bake away what she didn't want to face, prayed with her eyes closed tight, like the darkness inside her eyelids was safer than the truth outside. I wanted to hate her fully. I tried. But every now and then, I'd catch her watching me from the kitchen doorway, face pale, lips tight. And I'd see something in her eyes, something like grief. That confused me more than anything, because grief means loss. And what had she lost? It wasn't until much later, decades later, that I realized maybe she had her own secrets. Maybe he'd broken her too, in different ways. And maybe she made the same choice I did back then, to survive by pretending. That's the tragedy of silence in families like ours. It doesn't just protect the abuser, it turns everyone else into accomplices, even the ones who didn't ask for it, even the ones who bled too. I wrote a letter once, addressed to Mama. I was 12. It said, "If you see me, please save me. If you love me, please make him stop. I don't want to hate you." I never gave it to her. I burned it in the sink. And when she asked why it smelled like smoke, I said I'd left toast in the oven too long. She nodded, wiped the counter, and said, "Be careful next time, baby." I always was. I don't know what made me look in the mirror that day. Really look. I was 12, home from school early with a so-called stomach bug Mama didn't question. I stood in the bathroom, door locked, water running just loud enough to muffle everything outside. My hair was messy, my dress was wrinkled, I hadn't brushed my teeth, but for the first time, I stood still and stared. And what I saw scared me. Not because I looked sick or sad, but because I didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her eyes were hollow, her lips pressed in like she was afraid to speak. There was a bruise near her collarbone. Small. Faint, but still fresh. I hadn't even noticed it before. Her shoulders were hunched, like they were trying to fold into her chest, like she was trying to disappear. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was vanishing, piece by piece. That night, I took out the little blue notebook again. The same one Miss Claudette from Sunday school had given me 2 years earlier. I hadn't written in it in months. But this time, the words came fast. I saw myself today, and I don't want to be her anymore. I underlined it 3 times. Then I wrote a list, a small one, of the things I remembered liking before all of this started. Braiding my sister's hair, the smell of magnolia flowers, singing hymns with Mama in the kitchen. Drawing dresses I'd never wear, I stared at the list, fingers trembling. Those things felt like they belonged to someone else. A different girl, one who hadn't been touched, one who didn't flinch at kindness. I wanted to get her back, but I didn't know how. The next day, I tried something small. I wore a red ribbon in my hair, one Daddy didn't like because he said it was too bold for a God-fearing girl. I wore it anyway. At breakfast, he noticed. He reached across the table, tugged it loose, and said, "Don't dress like Jezebel in my house." Mama said nothing, just passed the grits. I went to school with my ribbon in my pocket and my pride in pieces. But still, something had shifted. Because now I knew I was still in there, somewhere. That afternoon, I sat behind the gym and sketched. Just dresses like I used to, big flowing ones with high collars and long sleeves. Not because I liked them that way, but because they felt safe. My art teacher, Miss Reeves, walked by and stopped. "Those yours?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled. "You've got a gift, Bertha. You ever think about design?" I shrugged. I hadn't thought about much of anything except making it through each day. "Well," she said, "if you ever want to stay after school and draw, you're welcome to. Doors always open." I didn't cry, but something in me cracked. Someone saw me, not as a daughter, not as a deacon's child, not as a body to be controlled, but as a person. That moment lived in me, not loud, not flashy, but steady. It became a thread I clung to, one sketch at a time. At home, Nothing changed. Daddy still came at night. Mama still cooked in silence. Church folks still praised our family as blessed and favored. But inside, I had taken one step back, toward the mirror. One step toward recognizing myself again. I wasn't free, but I was awake. Her name was Jolene Miller, and she moved into the house 3 doors down from ours when I was 13. She had freckles, chipped pink nail polish, and the boldest walk I'd ever seen. Like she owned every sidewalk she stepped on. Like she wasn't afraid of anything. I watched her from my window for weeks before we ever spoke. She'd sit out on her porch, chewing gum and blasting the radio, her daddy said. Was too worldly. Sometimes she read magazines with women in tight dresses and red lipstick. And sometimes she just stared up at the sky like she was waiting for a better life to fall out of it. I wanted to be her. But more than that, I wanted to know her. One afternoon, I was walking home from the store when she caught up to me on her bike. "You're Bertha, right?" she asked, squinting in the sun. I nodded. "You don't talk much." I shrugged. She laughed. "That's all right. Quiet girls sees everything." I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I'd come to understand later. Quiet girls see because they have to. That weekend, she invited me to her room, said she had something important to show me. I climbed through her window. She thought doors were boring, and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by notebooks and lipstick tubes. "I write poems," she said, "real ones, about my mama and boys and fear." She said it so casually, fear, like it was just another word. Then she looked at me, dead serious. "You scared of something?" I hesitated. "No." She raised an eyebrow. That didn't sound like a no. And somehow I laughed. She read me one of her poems. It was raw, angry, beautiful. She said, "People don't like it when girls are loud about their pain, but that's exactly why I write it down." I told her I drew dresses. She said that counted. "You make things beautiful," she said. "Me, I make things bleed." We were different, but somehow the same. In the awe. Weeks that followed, Jolene became my secret escape. Not like the kind Daddy whispered about, but a real one. Her window became my doorway out of silence. I told her little things at first, that I didn't like Sundays, that sometimes I hated how quiet our house was, that my daddy's prayers made me feel cold. She didn't flinch. Then, one night, I said more. "He comes into my room," I whispered. She stopped chewing her gum. Her whole face shifted. "He touches you?" I nodded. She didn't cry. Didn't gasp. She just reached for my hand and said, "Me too." And just like that, the silence cracked. We didn't have to explain everything. We just knew. She told me her uncle used to tuck her in when her mama was at work, that she'd screamed once, and no one came. I'd never felt more understood in my life. From that night on, we made a pact. We called it the window rule. If either of us needed out of our house, our heads, our secrets, we'd open our bedroom window and leave the curtain fluttering. That was the signal. There were nights I snuck out barefoot, heart pounding, just to sit on her floor and cry into her shoulder. Other nights we didn't talk, just sat, breathing the same air, knowing we weren't alone. Jolene gave me something Daddy never could, and Mama never tried to. Freedom, inside truth. She said, "Our pain ain't poetry, but it can be power if we name it right." That was the first time I believed maybe, just maybe, my voice was worth something. One night, we carved our names into the wood under her window. Bertha Puls Jolene, not his anymore. I traced those letters with my fingers every time I left. I still remember them, even now. It was late August when the house finally cracked, the kind of heat that pressed down on your skin like judgment. The air was thick with the scent of fried okra and ironed cotton. Daddy had just come home from a church meeting, his voice loud as ever, quoting scripture about submission and spiritual discipline. Mama was in the kitchen, wrists deep in dishwater, her face drawn tight. My sisters were upstairs. I was in the hallway listening, not because I wanted to, but because I had learned to listen the way some girls learn to pray. "You hear me, Eloise?" Daddy barked. "You think you run this house just 'cause you fold sheets and fry chicken?" Mama didn't answer. Then I heard the slam. Not a fist, not a plate, but the sharp crack of his Bible hitting the table. "You think God gave you a voice so you could question me?" Silence. I moved closer, heart pounding, feet bare. Then Mama said something I never thought I'd hear. "She's not a child anymore, Clarence." There it was, the first breach. He paused. The air shifted. "What did you say?" His voice dropped low, dangerous. Mama turned. I saw her profile from the hallway, face pale, shoulders squared. "I said she's not a child anymore. You can't hide behind God and shame forever." He stepped toward her. I held my breath. "Are you accusing me of something?" She didn't answer with words. She raised her hand and slapped him, hard. The sound echoed through the kitchen like thunder, then silence. Not the safe kind, the charged kind, like lightning right before it strikes. He didn't hit her back, didn't shout. He just picked up his keys, muttered something about needing air, and slammed the front door so hard the wall crucifix fell off its nail. Mama turned to me then. Our eyes locked. Neither of us spoke. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked slowly down the hallway, and said, "Go lock your door tonight, baby." It was the first time she gave me permission. That night, I dragged my dresser in front of my bedroom door, just in case. My arms shook, my chest ached, but my room stayed quiet. No footsteps, no knob turning. I slept for 6 hours straight, the most I'd slept in years. The next morning, Daddy was gone. Mama told the girls he was visiting his brother in Mobile, told the church he was taking time to reflect. But I knew better. She didn't cook his favorites, didn't hum hymns. She just cleaned, silently, fiercely, like she was purging him from the walls. 2 days later, she came into my room holding a shoebox, sat on my bed without asking. Inside the box were letters, old ones, dated back to before I was born, some from Daddy, some to someone I didn't know, some never mailed. She didn't explain them, just said, "You're not crazy, Bertha. I see now. I should have seen sooner." I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because I was too stunned. Mama had broken. And in that breaking, she had made space for truth. Before she left the room, she turned and said, "If you ever want to leave, I'll help you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a beginning. The first time I touched a Bible after Daddy left, I flinched. It wasn't the book's fault, but my hands remembered things my mouth hadn't said in years. The feel of leather against my skin while his voice whispered verses that twisted into threats. For so long, Scripture had been a cage he built around me, one verse at a time. So when Mama handed me his old Bible and said, "You can do what you want with it," I didn't know what to do. I stared at it for hours. It was thick, worn, tabs on every page, his name embossed in gold, Clarence J. Carter. He used to carry it like a badge, like proof that God walked beside him even while he broke every commandment behind closed doors. I thought about throwing it away, burning it even. But something stopped me. Instead, I carried it out to the backyard, sat under the pecan tree, and opened to the first marked page. Proverbs 31. "A virtuous woman is worth far more than rubies." I laughed out loud, because all my life that verse had been used like a leash, a reason to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay his. But now I saw it for what it was, not a command, but a measure. And maybe I wasn't meant to be measured by anyone but myself. So I kept reading, not as a believer, not yet, but as a girl looking for her voice in a book that once stole it. Hours passed. The sun dipped low. Mama watched me from the kitchen window but didn't interrupt. When I stood to go inside, I left the Bible on the ground, not out of disrespect, but because for the first time in my life, it didn't control me. That night, I wrote in my blue notebook, God didn't do what happened to me. Daddy did, and that difference matters. It was the first time I'd separated the two, and it felt like breathing. For the first time, after being underwater too long. Church changed after that. Mama stopped going every Sunday, said she needed space to rebuild. The church ladies whispered, of course. A deacon's wife staying home? But she didn't care anymore. Neither did I. When I did go, I sat in the back. I watched. I listened. And when the new pastor talked about forgiveness, I felt the old weight rise in my chest. Forgiveness was the word folks used when they didn't want to deal with pain. They said it. Like a cure. Like a duty. But no one ever said how, or whether you had to forgive someone who never said sorry. I didn't know if I forgave Daddy. Maybe I never would. But I knew I was done carrying him. That was enough. Her name was Miss Thelma. She'd been the school nurse at Booker T. Washington Middle since before I was born, and everyone knew not to mess with her. She had silver curls, a pearl brooch shaped like a dove, and a gaze that could see through lies like glass. I met her in 7th grade, the week after Daddy left. I had a fever. Or maybe I just said I did. Either way, I ended up on the cot in her office, blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the faded posters of food pyramids and wash your hands reminders taped to the walls. Miss Thelma sat beside me with her clipboard, jotting something down. Then she looked at me. Really looked. You okay, Bertha? I nodded. The automatic kind that didn't mean anything. She didn't buy it. Your mama called, she said. Told me. Your daddy's gone out of town. My breath caught. Was it a question? She said you ain't been sleeping much and that your appetite's near gone. I looked away. Miss Thelma didn't push. Instead, she stood, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled out a little tin of peppermints. Here, she said, holding one out. Might help settle your stomach. The smell hit me like a slap. Peppermint. Daddy's smell. I flinched. She noticed. Her hand hovered a second longer before she gently placed the mint on the side table and sat back down. I seen a lot in this room, she said. Girls with bruises they called clumsy. Girls with eyes too old for their age. And girls who kept secrets so deep they made themselves sick. I said nothing. Just gripped the edge of the blanket tighter. You ever need to talk, she said, voice soft but firm. I don't need details. I just need truth. Then she stood and walked out, leaving the door cracked open. That was the first time I considered telling an adult outside. My house. But the fear still gripped me too tight. What if she told Mama? What if the church found out? What if people thought I was lying? So I didn't go back. But the way she looked at me, not with pity, but with knowing, stayed with me. A few weeks later, she caught me outside the cafeteria and handed me a book. Said it was about girls who found their way. I opened the cover when I got home. Inside was a note in her handwriting. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after. I cried for an hour. Miss Thelma never pressed, never asked questions she knew I wasn't ready to answer. But she saw me. And sometimes that's the first kind of healing. Just being seen. Years later, I'd return to that school as a speaker. I'd tell pieces of my story to girls who wore the same uniforms, sat in the same hallways, and carried the same weight I once did. Miss Thelma came to that talk. She hugged me afterward, tight and warm, and whispered in my ear, I always knew you'd rise. And in that moment, I believed I had. I wrote the letter the night before my 16th birthday. I sat at my desk, the same one Daddy built for me when I started school, and stared at a blank piece of stationery Mama gave me years before. It had little blue flowers around the edges, delicate and soft, like the girl I used to be. At the top, I wrote, "Dear Pastor Ellington." I paused. He had known my family since before I was born. He baptized me in front of the whole congregation when I was 6. He preached fire and mercy, and he always said, "God don't sleep on injustice." I had believed that once, but I didn't know if I believed it now. Still, I kept writing. There are things I need to say, and I'm not sure who else to say them to. My daddy, Clarence Carter, he hurt me, for years, in ways I can't even write down without feeling sick. He used your sermons like shields. He said God told him to guide me, but it wasn't God in that room with me. It was him, and now he's gone. But I'm still here, and I don't know what to do with this truth. The pen slipped in my hand, fingers shaking. I don't want you to fix it. I don't need you to pray it away. I just need someone else to know. Because if I keep it inside, I think I'll disappear. I signed it only with my first name. Then I folded it, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it. Pastor Henry Ellington, Greater Mount Zion, Baptist Church, Jackson, MS. I held that letter in my hands. All night. In the morning, I placed it in my school bag, ready to drop it in the postbox. But halfway down the sidewalk, I stopped. What if he didn't believe me? What if he told Mama? What if he told the whole church? Or worse, what if he said nothing at all? That silence, that possibility, was louder than any sermon. I turned around, walked back inside, and tucked the envelope into the back of my notebook. I never mailed it, but I never threw it away. I kept it tucked in a shoebox under my bed, hidden between old report cards and drawings of dresses I never had the courage to wear. Years later, when I was married and living 2 counties away, I found it again during spring cleaning. My hands shook just touching the paper. But this time, I didn't cry. I just read it, all the way through, and whispered, "You were brave to write this." Because I was, even if no one read it but me. Writing that letter didn't save me, but it sustained me. It reminded me that the truth had weight, and that I was strong enough to carry it, and one day, strong enough to say it out loud. I was 22 when I gave birth to my daughter, Lorraine. She came into the world screaming, fists clenched, lungs strong, full head of hair like a halo of defiance. The nurse said, "You've got yourself a fighter." And I smiled through the sweat and exhaustion, because deep down I knew it was true. She didn't know it yet, but she had already survived so much just by being born. When I held her for the first time, something cracked open in me, something raw and old and buried. I looked into her tiny face and whispered, "You will never wonder if love means pain. Not while I'm breathing." I meant it, with every cell in my body. But it wasn't easy. Being a mother when your own childhood was shaped by silence is like learning to walk in the dark. You bump into the past with every step. You question every instinct. You fear every shadow. My husband, Thomas, was kind, a quiet man, steady. He loved. Lorraine fiercely changed diapers without being asked and kissed her forehead like she was made of glass. But still, every time he walked into her nursery alone, a knot would rise in my chest. Not because of anything he did, but because of everything I remembered. I hated that. I hated that my father still lived inside my fears, haunting moments that should have been filled with peace. One night, when Lorraine was about 6 months old, she cried in her crib longer than usual. I rushed in, heart pounding, breath shallow. Thomas was already there, gently rocking her, singing low. But I didn't see a father in that moment. I saw a ghost. I froze in the doorway, every muscle tense, waiting, not for danger, but for memory. He turned to me, startled by my face. "What's wrong?" he asked. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. He placed Lorraine gently back in her crib, then walked over, took my hand, and said, "Talk to me." And for the first time, I did. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. I told. Him, my daddy, wasn't who people thought he was. That he used his Bible like a weapon. That I had spent my whole life afraid of love. Because love had always come with conditions, with shame, with blood. Thomas didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just held me. And that night I slept through till morning. Something I hadn't done in years. Lorraine grew fast. By 2, she was curious and fearless. By 4, she was asking questions I didn't always know how to answer. But I made her one. Promise. You can always ask me anything. And I will always tell you the truth. Because I knew the cost of silence. I watched her play one day in the yard, twirling in a yellow dress I'd sewn for her birthday, almost the same shade I used to wear. And I didn't flinch. Not this time. Because this yellow wasn't stained with memory. It was sunlight. And for once, I let it warm me. I was 51 when I walked into a therapist's office for the first time. The waiting room smelled like lavender and books. There was soft jazz playing from a speaker somewhere I couldn't see. I sat on a beige couch, hands folded tight, heart trying to escape my chest. I didn't know what I was doing there. All I knew was that I'd spent most of my life stitching over wounds that never healed. I had a good job at the library, a daughter in college, a husband who brought me roses on random Tuesdays. But inside, I still flinched at shadows. Still had dreams where the lock clicked and his voice called my name like a hymn. So when Lorraine said, "Mama, you don't have to carry this alone anymore," I listened. I didn't tell her what this was, not fully, but she knew enough to help me take that first step. The therapist's name was Dr. Evans. She was in her 60s, wore comfortable shoes and large glasses, and had a way of looking at you that made it hard to lie, even to yourself. She greeted me with a warm smile and said, "Take your time." And so I did. For weeks, I talked around the truth. About mamas. Silence. About my insomnia. About how I couldn't wear certain perfumes without my stomach turning. About how Lorraine's bedtime songs sometimes made me cry for no reason. Then, one afternoon, she asked a question that hit like thunder. "Bertha, when did you first learn that love could hurt?" The words caught in my throat. I stared at the window for a long time. The trees outside were moving in the wind, bending but never breaking. And then I said it. I was 9. My daddy said it was God's will. The room went quiet, not heavy, not judgmental, just still, like it was holding space for me. She didn't ask for details, just nodded. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly. "That's not small, that's sacred." For the first time, I believed that. Each session after that peeled back another layer. The guilt, the shame, the fear I'd carried into motherhood, into marriage, into every quiet moment where my mind wandered too far. Dr. Evans helped me name what I never could before. It wasn't my fault. That sentence changed me. Not all at once, but piece by piece. We talked about trauma as a house, how you can live in it so long, you forget there's a door. Forget you can leave, or repaint, or knock the whole thing down and start over. And I wanted to start over. So I did. I began journaling again, not like the frantic scribbles of my girlhood, but with intention. I wrote letters to my younger self. I wrote to Daddy, to Mama, even to Pastor Ellington, letters I'd never send, but needed to release. One of those letters read, "You don't own me anymore, not my body, not my story, not my God." Dr. Evans said healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about reclaiming. And I believed her. One afternoon, I brought in my blue notebook, the original one, pages worn, corners frayed. I read from it out loud, shaking, crying, but proud. When I finished, she said, "You were brave at 9, you're braver now." I walked out that day lighter, not whole, but closer than I'd ever been. I never thought I'd walk through the doors of Greater Mount Zion again. Not after everything that happened between those walls. Not after all the Sundays I sat in a pew, bleeding inside while Daddy stood up front, Bible in hand, preaching purity like he owned the word. But healing has a strange way of circling back to the place where the wound first opened. It was Lorraine who asked me to go. She was 24, fresh out of grad school, full of fire and compassion. "You always told." "Me silence was the enemy," she said. "Maybe it's time someone else heard the truth." The church was hosting a special Sunday on restoration and redemption. They invited past members to speak. Lorraine signed me up before I had the nerve to say no. "I can unsign you if you want," she said gently. But something in me, something old and trembling but stubborn, said, "No, let it stay." So that Sunday I stood outside those wooden doors, palms sweating, knees weak. The church hadn't changed much. The carpet was new, but the cross was the same. So were the pews, so were the stairs. But this time I had changed. Mama came with me. She sat in the front row, dressed in soft blue, hands folded tight. She hadn't stepped foot inside that sanctuary in decades either. But she came. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the pulpit, the same one Daddy used to preach from, and looked out at the crowd. Faces from my past, some kind, some unsure, some already closing their hearts. I took a deep breath. "My name is Bertha Carter," I began. "Some of you knew me as Clarence Carter's daughter, but that's not who I am today." Silence. "I was 9 when the abuse began. 9 when my father, your deacon, your teacher, used scripture to justify what no child should ever endure." Gasps. Shuffling, but I kept going. I was silent for decades, out of fear, out of shame, out of loyalty to a man who twisted God into a weapon. I paused, looked down at my hands, then back at the crowd. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth, because the only way to break cycles is to bring them into the light." One woman in the third pew began to cry. Another shifted uncomfortably. I continued. "I still believe in faith, but not in blind obedience. I still believe in healing, but not without accountability, and I believe in God, not the one my father spoke of, but the one who was with me in the dark when no one else was." When I stepped down, the room was still. Then, slowly, a few people stood, then a few more, and then applause. Not thunderous, but steady, real. Pastor Whitman, a younger man who took over years after Daddy passed, approached me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "We failed you." I didn't need the apology, but I accepted it. Not for him, for me. That day, I let the walls of silence crumble, and I walked out of that church freer than I had ever been. I was 63 the first time I stood in front of a room full of teenage girls and told them. What happened to me? It was a small group at the community center, maybe a dozen of them, all in folding chairs, some chewing gum, others scrolling on their phones. They weren't ready to trust me. I wasn't sure I was ready to trust myself either, but I had a blue notebook in my bag, the same one I used to write in when I was 9. And I had my voice. That was enough. The director introduced me as a local woman with a powerful testimony. I hated that word. Testimony. It made my pain sound like a performance. So I walked to the front, took the mic, and said simply, "My name is Bertha. I'm a survivor. And for most of my life, I thought I was the only one." That got their attention. One girl looked up. Another sat a little straighter. I told them what I could, not every detail, not every scar, but enough. Enough to make the room still, enough to make their eyes soften. I told them about the silence, about how I smiled through Sunday school while bleeding inside, about how people said, "You're so well behaved," not knowing obedience had become my armor. I told them about Jolene, about sneaking out of the house just to breathe, about writing letters I never sent, crying in bathrooms, hiding in closets, praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. and I told them how long it took me to find my voice. "I don't want you to wait as long as I did," I said. Then I held up my blue notebook. "This is where I started telling the truth. If you've got something hurting inside you, write it down, speak it, draw it, dance it, but don't carry it alone." One girl raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 15. She said, "What if no one believes you?" I swallowed. Then I said, "Believe yourself. That's the hardest part. But once you do, others will follow. And the ones who don't? They were never safe to begin with." Another girl whispered, "Me too." She didn't say what. She didn't have to. Afterward, a few stayed behind. One gave me a hug so tight I thought my ribs might break. Another slipped a note in my hand before walking away. It said, "Thank you. I needed to know I'm not broken, just bruised." That note lives on my fridge now, right next to Lorraine's graduation photo. I've spoken at dozens of places since then: shelters, schools, women's groups, churches that learned to listen. I don't always tell the whole story, but I always tell the truth. Because when I speak, I don't just speak for me. I speak for the girl I used to be, and for the girls still. Learning how to say me, too. I turned 76 this year. Sometimes I forget where I left my keys or what I walked into a room for. But I never forget the way that doorknob used to turn, slow and quiet, right before the dark came in. Some memories fade, others stain. But even stains can be turned into stories. I sit on my porch most mornings now, sweet tea in hand, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes down the same street I once walked with my head down. Sometimes I hear their laughter and wonder what my laugh would have sounded like if I hadn't learned to whisper instead. But I don't dwell, because I made it. Not just through the pain, not just through the silence, but through the becoming. I became a woman who raised a daughter unafraid to speak. I became a wife who didn't flinch when love reached out its hand. I became a voice in rooms that used to ignore voices like mine. And most of all, I became free. Not healed all the way, not untouched, but mine. My body, my story, my God, my truth. People still ask me sometimes, "Do you forgive him?" I used to hate that question. Forgiveness always sounded like something for him. A gift I was supposed to give, tied in a ribbon of grace. But now I understand. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, isn't about him. It's about me not carrying his weight in my bones anymore. It's about waking up and choosing to remember, without letting it steal today. Some days, I do forgive him. Other days, I just release him. That's enough. I keep my blue notebook on a shelf now. The pages are fragile, the ink faded. But every so often, I open it and read the words I once wrote in a trembling hand. I am not his anymore. And now I say it out loud. I am not his anymore. I say it for the girl who couldn't scream. I say it for the girls still hiding. I say it for the women who carry shame that was never theirs. I say it for you. Because maybe your story's not the same as mine. Maybe your pain has different names. But if you're reading this, or watching this, and something inside you feels seen, let that be your sign. You are not alone. You were never alone. And your silence was never your fault. I was 73 when I told the truth. If you're still holding yours, this is your sign. Let go of the silence. You are not alone, and you never were. This channel exists to honor the voices of women who were told to be quiet. We're here to listen. We're here to remember. And we're here to rise together. If you come from a place like Jackson, or you've carried a secret for too long, leave a comment with your city. Speak your truth. Someone needs to hear it. Like this video if Bertha's story moved you, and subscribe for more real voices finally being heard.